do you ever stop for a moment to consider that your body never wanted any of this either? That's the felt sense of forgiveness, is when we can come to this really in-depth understanding of both self and body to move into this more what we call subjective view, which is, wait a second, now I'm in relationship with this body. Like, I understand, even though I don't like the things that I've done that may have been harming in some way, I now have a deep understanding of why that happened, how I was only being protective of myself and adaptive and everything, how I was trying to live in this world
Hmm.
that, encourages constant separation.
Today, my guest is Dr. Anne Saffi Biasetti. She is a practicing clinician for over 35 years. She is a transpersonal psychologist specializing in somatic psychotherapy, eating disorder, and trauma recovery. She is the originator of the Befriending Your Body program, which is a program of somatic self-compassion for disordered eating and recovery. She is a certified mindfulness teacher, mindful self-compassion teacher, and certified yoga therapist. Dr. Biasetti specializes in integrating somatic self-compassion into disordered eating recovery. She consults and lectures extensively on the topic of somatic psychotherapy, embodiment, nervous system regulation, and interoceptive awareness in eating disorder recovery, and is an instructor at the Center for Mindful Body Awareness and in the Self-Compassion in Psychotherapy program, where she shares her expertise in somatic self-compassionate interventions for eating disorder recovery. She has featured CE webinars and workshops and trains professionals in the Befriending Your Body certification program for eating disorder recovery. She is the author of Befriending Your Body, a self-compassionate approach to freeing yourself from disordered eating, as well as The Awakening Self-Compassion Card Deck, 52 practices for self-care, healing, and growth. Dr. Biasetti also maintains a private practice in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here's my conversation with Dr. Anne. Today we are with Dr. Anne Saffi Biasetti. Thank you so much for being here today, Anne.
Thank you for having me, Christina. So nice to be with you.
Yeah, so nice to be with you too. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? You are this, you have so many credentials. You are a multiple time author. You are a yoga therapist. You're a seasoned somatic psychotherapist, all these things. And I just wonder, like, was it sort of a straight shot getting here? Have you always been sensitive and somatically oriented? Or I know, like, I kind of came into this whole somatic stuff because I was like so severely disconnected. So I came here because I was like so not connected. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, wow, it's a long story. So I'll try and make it short. But I would say that it's all of those things that you mentioned as well. But really, I would say that I came to discover I was always a really sensitive being in the world and
Yeah.
very sensory oriented. As a kid, I had a lot of sensory, what we call sensory offensive things. I didn't like my
Mm.
socks rolled down and I didn't like
Mm.
tags on me. And I didn't like certain temperatures and certain textures of
Hmm.
foods and
Hmm.
all that. And I would say I'm still that way as an adult, but we never paid attention to that stuff, especially in my generation.
Right.
It
Right.
was just like more like you were being a pain in the neck kid.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I was taught to actually move away from those things and to think of them as bad and not
Mm.
okay and all of that. And I was always definitely like really all through high school, even very interested in going into the helping profession. So I was one of those kids that kind of was an empath all along and knew that I want to go into the helping profession. So right from high school, my college degree was right into human services and development and social work minor there. And I knew I was going to go on and all this. But during high school is when I was introduced to yoga. And it was a odd place because it was an all-girl Catholic high school, and I was introduced to yoga there. And I would say that that was the first time for me personally that I connected to my sensory awareness in a positive, non-judgmental way.
Mm.
Like I loved the sensory impact that certain poses gave me. In particular, I loved shoulder stand. It was like my favorite, and I still can, love it and remember what it felt like to this day, feeling it for the first time then. So I never forgot that because as we know, when it comes to an embodied experience that really feels like a remembrance for you, that's what I like to tell my folks, you don't forget it. So that really stayed with me. And I started dabbling in yoga through my 20s just as a stress reduction for me. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was putting it together that it was also such a big sensory impact for me.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I had, gone on through all my schooling in my clinical work and into my master's at that point, and I was a young therapist at that time, I was always interested in the holistic and humanistic theorists, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really what I spent my time doing postgraduate work in Gestalt therapy and all the humanistic theories.
Mm-hmm.
So Gestalt was very body-based, and it was very parts-based and body-based. And so little did I know I was also feeding that interest. It wasn't until I started moving more and more into yoga myself on a personal level and really took a deep dive into it, like at around age 30, 31, after I gave birth to my twin boys, and I was sick with an autoimmune, and I went toward that practice because I knew and remembered that I had the sensory relief. When I did that and I started to explore this enormous shift that was happening, not in taking away the illness, of course, nothing was going to take that away, but it was an enormous shift in what was happening in my ability to cope with it, in my ability to reflect upon it differently, and to notice that actually a lot of the time, what was really causing the most distress for me was my inability to just be with my current sensory experience because I was in a state where most of us will get into when we have body distress, which is I was in a state of hyper reactivity and fearing what would be next rather than what was in that moment. So every time I was in practice, I was able to release that predicting mind and the mind that was terrified about this. And I was able to just be with my body and my body's sensations. And I remember distinctly one day coming out of practice and going to a friend's house. I would actually drop my kids off, so I could go to this class. I would drop my kids off with my friends. She would watch them for me, and it was medicinal for me. And I remember coming out and thinking as a therapist, like, what is happening? Like, no therapy ever helped me with that. No therapy ever
Mm-hmm.
helped me actually be with this sensitive sensory experience and teach me how to separate my mind's reactivity from that and how
Mm-hmm.
to join that instead. So it was that point in time that I said, I have to learn more about this. And I wanted to go right to the source, which was this ancient practice. I didn't want to go to, I love the westernized, somatic therapies, but I needed to go to the psycho-spiritual approach. I needed to go also to the anatomical approach. I wanted to learn about my body on an
Mm-hmm.
anatomical level and what was happening. So that's where I started my path on my yoga training, right from yoga teacher training to where I showed up. And when they asked people if they wanted to teach, I said, no, I don't want to teach. I just want to marry these two worlds.
Yeah.
And then I went on for all my yoga therapy training. But of course, as soon as I finished even my yoga teacher training, I was immediately teaching and fell in love with it. And it's still my absolute joy to teach my community classes. But the yoga therapy route was my introduction in bringing these worlds together. And so sometimes people say, oh, you do so many different things. I'm like, actually, no, I do all the same thing. It's just through a different lens and varying interventions, some that are 3,000 years old and some that are more, I would call quote unquote new, but still are informed by those original practices.
Mm-hmm. And what type of yoga did you teach or do you teach now? Did you teach something different before, and how has that sort of evolved?
Yeah, that has completely really changed for me, both in my personal practice and in my teaching. So I began, as a 200-hour teacher, I began teaching, vinyasa classes and gentle asana classes. So asana meaning the poses that we're used to in, especially in westernized yoga. But when I went for my yoga therapy training, that is when I learned the much larger holistic model of yoga, which is based on what we call the Panchamaya yoga system, which includes a real understanding of a human body on multiple layers. We call them the koshas. And that really started to change my teaching around a great deal. I also had gone for my mindfulness training, during that time as well, because my yoga therapy had introduced me to that and Buddhist
Mhm.
studies in a big way. So I started integrating all of that into my classes, and students were really loving being reflective of where their mind was at during the practice so that they weren't just moving their bodies, they were making this. People would come to my classes and say, "Hey, I think this is my weekly therapy," because they were noticing those kinds of changes that I noticed years ago. And so I moved from teaching my active classes because as I moved along, one of the things that is very true when it comes to somatic experience and really bringing alive the embodied experience and mind reflection is we need to go slow and we need to go slower and deeper. So what was happening in my traditional classes in moving through vinyasa, and I love that, and I still do that sometimes in my own practice, is that I didn't have the time to slow
Mhm.
people down, both in their form so that they could find what worked for their body uniquely, but I also didn't have the time to let them stay and
Mhm.
really savor a sensory experience, watch how it shifts and changes, feel into that, create their own movement around it. So a couple of years ago, actually, probably about after 17 years of teaching, my classes in a certain way, that I was really, like I said, mixing everything together, but not going slow enough for me. I decided to let go of my active classes and just do
Mhm.
workshops in that once in a while. And now what I teach is my full yoga therapy classes, which is restorative, sensory-based, restorative yoga, yin yoga, which is also I use in a very sensory-based way with a lot of
Mhm.
propping.
Mhm.
And my favorite, which I just spent 3 years training in with T.S. Little, has been the myofascial release yoga, which has been just such a gift in my own body. And then with my students, it's a beautiful sensory-based practice that really gets to slow us down and move deeply into those layers. So yeah, it's transformed through the years in so many ways. My personal practice really guided that.
That's so wonderful. I'm like, oh my gosh, do you offer these online?
I actually will be very
Okay.
soon. So come fall, 2026, this fall, I am starting to record, especially the myofascial release practices. Yes,
Wonderful.
that's been a real, I've been listening to what the community is asking for. And with this new book coming out, that's going to fit nicely with it.
Wonderful. Before we talk about your new book, because I'm super interested about your new book, was it your first book or I don't know. Okay, so your first book, Befriending Your Body, that was your
Yeah.
first book. Okay. So I read that book. I love that book. I also took your course, Befriending Your Body. So that came after your immersion in yoga therapy. And did you write the book first and then create it as an online offering and a certification, or was it kind of the other way around?
Yeah, no, it was after all my after all that somatic training, then I went back to school for my PhD in
Hmm.
transpersonal psychology, and that's where I did the research on the role of self-compassion in eating disorder recovery, and that turned into the book. At the time I was doing the research, I had no idea I'd be writing a book, and then when the book came out, I had no idea it would turn into a program, but that is what was being called for from the
Mm.
outside. So I have learned, thankfully, through the years to kind of quiet my projecting and,
Hmm.
mind and just
Yeah.
wait and see what's called for those who are reading it and wanting
Yeah.
it. So that turned into the program after the book. Yep.
Okay. I'll include the links and everything in the episode description so
Sure.
people can check out the book and the program and everything. It's wonderful. I've recommended people to become certified. One recently got certified and said it was
Yeah.
really wonderful. wonderful. Yeah. So we'll
That's
include the
wonderful.
links there. So then fill us in on this sort of next evolution. Thank you so much for kind of giving the illustration of this evolution. And so then now, what inspired you to write this book that is going to be soon released?
That came from this book was the idea for this book has been brewing long before I even, gosh, went back to school for my doctoral work. So this book has been brewing for about 20 years. It actually started, funny enough, when I moved up to where I am now in upstate New York about 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I just was out to dinner one night with a friend and we were sitting outside and it was like in one of these communal spaces where other people
Mhm.
could sit with us. And a woman sat next to us with her husband and we got to talking and somehow she mentioned yoga, meditation. And my friend said, well, my friend here, teaches that in the community. And I don't believe that this was meant to be a criticism, but she kind of looked at me. I was all dressed up and I like to decorate with my makeup and all, and I always do and always will. And she looked at me and she actually said, "Oh, wow, I'm surprised." And I said, "Oh, what surprises you?" She said, "Well, you don't look like a yoga teacher." And I thought that was very interesting. Like I wasn't offended by it at all. I actually was very interested in it. At the time, I was running in the community women's embodiment groups based on my
Mm,
yoga therapy model.
mhm.
And I said, well, I was just kind of curious, like what do you think a yoga meditation teacher should look like? I said, do you think it should look like someone who doesn't, dress or wear makeup or whatever? I mean, she was like, well, I'm just not sure. Yeah, maybe, maybe. And I was like, oh, that's interesting to me. I said, thank you for letting me know. I said, because I was sort of collecting this understanding of how we see each other, especially how women see each other. It was in that moment that it really started making me wonder, and this is a long time before we started really delving into, at least in a more mainstream way, the sociocultural impacts. I mean, they were out there, but they were mostly out there with the feminist theorists, that I later quoted in my dissertation, But
Mhm.
at that time, it wasn't really openly discussed and
Yeah.
openly understood how embedded this kind of thing is between women, how we go from this connected, cooperative nature to this competitive, comparative nature. So
Mhm.
I was very curious about that. And then all my work at that time, like I said, I was running these women's embodiment groups, all my community classes with women. My practice, I would say, is about 80% women, not because I invited that to be, just because of the work, the nature of the work with bodies that I
Mhm.
was doing. And then when I started to run my program and the stories upon stories and stories of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women that I've heard in my embodiment retreats. And so this has been brewing for a long time, this wish to understand disembodiment in the female body for so long. After I wrote the first book, I reached out to my publisher, and I said, I have this idea. And I think they could tell I wasn't ready. They kept saying,
Mhm.
well, how about you do the card deck instead? Which I did. And I loved it. And it was great fun for me to do that. But I was a little bit frustrated, because I was like, but I have this idea brewing. But then really what came to me is I needed to do another research study because that is how I embody the work is I need to go really deep in this lived experience and the stories of others. And not that I don't do that in my work, but I needed to do it in actually another qualitative research study. So
Mhm.
I had been forever interested since this first book and the program in the role of forgiveness and watching people shift from forgiving themselves from what I call the mind, forgiveness from the mind, which is believing they've done something wrong or they need to exonerate themselves in some way, to this softening into what I call body forgiveness in this new book, which is this understanding through a release and relief in their body that they never did anything wrong, that they never asked for this separation. They never wished to harm or hurt themselves in any way. And that now they are longing and hoping and wishing for body reconnection, which was always their truth, which is the way we're born, you know. So this body forgiveness changes the whole perspective around, and that is what I needed to understand more. And that's why the research study was a study on the role of this process of forgiveness and what it did for embodiment. So it kind of landed into a, as most qualitative research studies do, a low-level process of kind of how to get from disembodiment to embodiment.
So are you saying that the process of body forgiveness is sort of the same as embodiment, as like trying to reconnect?
Yeah, no, it is because what the change from forgiving from the mind to forgiving the body, um,
Hmm.
that switch, the way it shifted for folks, is it shifted from seeing their body as this separate entity, or what we call an embodiment, the objective view. Like, oh, I did something wrong to this body, and this body's been harming me, you know, as this
Hmm.
separateness
Yeah.
to really the question that I ask a lot of people and that we go over in the book, you know, constantly is this reflective question of, I know this has been hard for you. I know that there's been things that, you know, you've done and that you feel your body has gone through to make you suffer as well. But do you ever stop for a moment to consider that your body never wanted any of this either?
Hmm.
And that's the felt sense of forgiveness is when we can come to this really in-depth understanding of both self and body to move into this more what we call subjective view, which is, wait a second, now I'm in relationship with this body. Like I understand, even though I don't like the things that I've done that may have been harming in some way, I now have a deep understanding of why that happened, you know, how I was only being protective of myself and adaptive and everything, how I was trying to live in this world
Hmm.
you know, encourages constant separation. So that in-depth understanding leads to the moment that we start turning toward our body again
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
say, wait a second, you know, you didn't want any of this either. This
Right.
is the nature of this relationship. The nature of this self and body relationship is one.
Is there research on body forgiveness already? Like, I'm like thinking, I'm like, wait, is there, like, I know your book is all about this research on body forgiveness that you're doing, but I'm imagining what would be the key words, like, if I were to look, like, who is talking about? I'm thinking self-compassion is maybe related, and there's, literature on that, or like, can you tell me a little bit about precedents?
Yeah, you know, when I don't believe there is specific to that wording
Mm-hmm.
and embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
Embodiment, of course, is the subjective relationship. There's lots of research and writing, philosophical
Mm-hmm.
writing, of course, on embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
I actually started using that term myself when you know, I'm very involved with the self-compassion community, obviously, and for the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, many years ago, Chris Germer had hosted me on one of their retreat days where I actually started to teach about this concept probably about 6 years ago or so when I started talking about this role of body forgiveness because I had noticed in my Befriending Your Body program that the role of forgiveness was central to self-compassion, but then also central to being able to move from an objective view to a subjective view of one's body. So I started really putting the concept out in the world through practice, and
Mm-hmm.
people were really responding to it. And Chris used it in a couple of his workshops, and people really responded to it. So I was like, you know, I'm on to something here with these words and what that means toward a different relationship with one's body. And that's what sparked me to just finally do my research on this theme.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that comes to mind, and I don't really quite have my thought forms, so
Hmm.
maybe you can I'd just love to hear your thoughts. In my own experience with my eating disorder and also having a lot of chronic pain, to me it felt like a very strangely similar experience. You know, it's like I felt like and there was a lot of harshness towards my body and being like this like mofo, you know, like the goblin of the eating disorder that's like, you know, the Jekyll and Hyde, and like I just want, you know, to make this like rational decision. And then something happens and there's a dissociation. And then my body is doing the exact opposite of what I had said that I would do early in the day, right? So that felt like my experience, right? And then I felt a similar sort of unrelenting frustration regarding my body as well in the realm of like aches and pains and injuries and stuff, and being like, I feel like I'm in control of my body, and yet inexplicably I'm waking up and this hurts, and it just felt like so excruciating and mysterious. Both of them felt very mysterious and led to me feeling like that there's like a betrayal, that like my body is doing something that I don't want. I'm not in board with. I don't even know how this happens, you know? And I mean, I've been in a constant evolution and process and progress and so forth, but I wonder if people have expressed certain things similar to that, and how, yeah, forgiveness can sort of be a balm, I don't know, for all these sort of things.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of that and more, right? Because it is so difficult, first off, to come near our bodies when we feel we're in that cycle of adaptation. Oh, but that led to harm. And then that harm leads to more disconnection. And then that leads to pain in the body. And then that leads to the cycle of staying away from the body. And we're in a vicious cycle then, like kind of chasing our tail, you know?
Mhm.
Like, how do we get close to this body? And I really think it has to begin with, like I said, that gentle understanding of why we were even doing these things to begin with, you know, which, in the book, I talk about that first stage of the understanding of what's out in the world, just how disembodiment occurs to begin with. And then we have to understand our own individual impacts, the exceptional experiences that we've gone through in our lives that land with our body in our system and create patterns of holding in our body that don't feel great. This whole, I've been watching everything go wild on Instagram about, oh, does the body really keep the score and hold on?
Yeah, I've seen
I'm,
that.
I'm laughing with it, because I've been doing this 36 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, we will never stop arguing the mind-body divide, will we? And I feel like anything that comes out now still creates more division. And the bottom line is, yes, there is no separation to any experience we have in life and the way it lands in our brain and our body. And there's no separation between our brain and our somatosensory system. Everything is connected, everything responds. So when we have those aches and pains, when we have those responses, that is real. That is absolutely real. It's real in that moment. And some of the most crucial work we need to do to get close to the body again is in that understanding, number one, which creates some of that softening, as you said, like this understanding of, wait a second, I say this in my program, out of fairness, neither of us asked for this. So that's kind of where I ask people to just level the playing field, because it's one thing to say, I didn't ask for this. This body is a pain in the ass,
Hmm.
And it's another thing to say, oh, my body didn't ask for this. People may not be ready for that. But when I level the playing field and say, can we just make it equal right now to say that, okay, neither you nor your body wanted this experience. And now where can we go from here? And that levels the playing field to just be like, okay, let me get curious now. And the next stage that's essential is kind of like what I said happened to me on that yoga mat is we have to teach people how to begin to separate what is their mind's reaction to what they remember from the past, what they have associated, what they are predicting about the future.
Hmm.
We have to help them separate that from the immediate bodily experience. that's happening in the sensory and autonomic system. And that is hard to do. That's like really hard to do. So that's where when I travel along in the book, self-compassion is essential with that because we have to come in and learn how to calm the critical mind that will say it will always be like this.
Mm.
Will always do this. This is because I did this, so we have to calm that critical mind. So the stages of body forgiveness work with the mind in a huge way, as well as being able to bring someone closer to their sensory experience and begin to understand what is a sensation, what is a pure sensation. And so these are the stages that we kind of go through in the book. But as you said, that softening is going to be essential. And that comes in the way of both finding ease in the body through the sensory experience, through the somatic practices, and also finding softness in the mind where self-compassion is primary here. It's like woven into embodiment. There is no separation. We can't be embodied unless we are being self-compassionate. We just can't. Critical mind will take you right back into disembodiment.
That's so true. In your newsletters that you've been sharing, that I'm getting your newsletters, there was a really interesting entry because sometimes you're sharing little clips from pieces of your upcoming book, and there was one called Autoimmune and Shame, or I'm not sure if that's the title, but that was the subject, and that one really impacted me. And I really loved how you explained that and kind of voiced something that I hadn't really, hadn't really voiced it before, but essentially you were saying, and you can totally expound on this, but basically the experience of having a lot of bodily pain and autoimmune issues and being like ashamed because aren't you supposed to be like this person who is an expert in the body? Is it reflecting poorly on you that you have all these aches and pains and you're feeling stressed about it because you're supposed to be like the guru, right? And that just really resonated with me because um, I have a master's in exercise science and I used to be a professional athlete and a professional fitness trainer. And I have a similar experience where I also have autoimmune stuff and I have pains, and there's a part of me that has felt ashamed, like, did I do something wrong? Because this isn't normal or something like that, right? And being like, I don't want to share certain things because then is it going to undermine my reputation or something like that? And the point that I got out of it is like the difference now is I'm self-compassionate with these things. Like it's not that the aches and pains aren't here. It's not that distress isn't here, but I am gentler with myself. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, just different reframe and perspective to bring to a difficult situation. I was wondering if you want to expound on that or like, yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for bringing it up, Christina, because I think it's just, first of all, it's so real in women's bodies, number one, and I have multiple autoimmune illnesses, and that was like the first one at a young age too, so that was like the first thing I was dealing with way back when I said that yoga was my lifesaver with
Right.
that. And that one was a little bit different because with that one, it affected my thyroid gland. I had Graves' disease. And so they took the thyroid gland out. And yes, I became hypothyroid and medication dependent and always had autoimmunity, inflammation, and all that from a young age. But we were able to control it because they took the
Hmm.
gland out, and so my body wasn't reacting to something and overproducing in the same way. But this particular, it was interesting. I was in the middle of writing the book and not feeling well.
Mm.
Not feeling well. I was like, something is going on, something's going on. And long story short, of course, who was going to be the body advocate? I spent years in that first one with no one advocating and being a young mother with two babies in her arms and saying, like, who's going to advocate for me? And with this one, I learned my lesson well, not only because I am embodied at this point and so interoceptively aware, But I just knew that I'm dealing with, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, I'm dealing in a medical system that still views the mind and the body as separate.
Mm-hmm.
It still disregards the interconnectivity of a body, meaning one area to the next, one organ to the next. And so I really had to chase this down, and I got turned away by so many people, even top people in New York City, that I went and searched out. I remember leaving an office and my husband saying to me, "Well, do you feel better?" She said that, that's not what you have. And I was like, "No, I don't feel better at all because I know my body and I know that I'm not feeling well." So this was the thing is that, finally when I went to someone and they did full panel of all these odd, blood work tests that no one even knew about, actually. No, my primary had never even heard of these tests. We finally discovered what it was, and now I'm with the rheumatologist and what have you. But it is something that, when I first, my head was spinning, for a number of months, saying like, whoa, first thing I did though, and this is where self-compassion comes in, is that, and how I knew self-compassion is just so embedded now, is that in the past, if my head would have spun to freaking out, or because there's nothing to remove now with this one,
Mm-hmm.
this is a connective tissue issue, and there's nothing to remove. So my head would have spun out in the past, and my head probably would have spun to not only the worst case scenario, but also to what did I do? And
Mm-hmm.
what could I do more now?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have jumped into striving mode. But instead, what I immediately jumped to was, aha, now I can put this whole puzzle piece together. Now I know what my body's been trying to tell me. And I actually sat with that and reflected on every single little interoceptive signal that I've been receiving for the last 3 years, maybe even more actually. But it would come and go, But for the last 3 years, consistently, I was able to put like my interoceptive puzzle together and be like, oh gosh, it all makes sense. And it was like a big hug to
Mm-hmm.
me and my body. And instead of like, I'm going to do more or figure this out, I was more like, I got you. And, I started doing little things. Like I did all my own investigation because you don't find out much.
Mm-hmm.
And I did all my own investigation. And when I mean about like not striving, but yet showing up for my body is I've
Mm-hmm.
done little things, like even some of the supplements I've been taking that I thought were helpful have additives that I
Mm-hmm.
read could be inflammatory to this particular autoimmune.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to get new supplements without those additives. So it was like little things, like I'm not striving to find, the cure and what have you, because there is none, but to be with this and a lot of adaptation that some days it's exhausting to manage it. I said, I feel like I'm really managing a whole firm within me. It's like a high-end business or Royce I'm taking care of right now. And then other days it's less. But that's the thing is that self-compassion was there immediately to be like, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the biggest difference. And that is what I mean by embodiment is that it's not, we're no longer going to meet these bodies with the critical. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't grieve and that I didn't go through and still don't go through the wonderment of maybe, maybe not. In the book, I call those the muddy water regrets. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's things I could say, well, maybe if I did this instead of doing that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a maybe, maybe not situation. I have no idea. I have
Yeah.
no idea, no clue. The true embodied path is that we can be with that grief. We can be with those regrets. We can let it move into grieving. There's plenty of days I have to just cry on my way home from work if I'm in that sheer hit by a truck exhaustion,
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do, or on my mat, in my practices. And then there's plenty of days where I'm like, oh, today I feel like I don't even have anything like this was 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. That's just such a real world example. Like it just that resonates so much because sometimes when we think about embodiment or yeah, how and body forgiveness and all that, it seems a bit abstract, but literally everything you're describing, there's some similarities in my story or some stuff that I've been going through and I think it's so relatable and that those do feel like ways that you can be present with the difficulties and not disconnect from your body in the ways that you used to, um, but to acknowledge and to grieve and to still acknowledge the reality of the challenge, but to give yourself what you need, research other supplements, give yourself loving care, give yourself the space to feel these things. It's just such a wonderful example, and I love that so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it really is a piece of, and then what I like to say too, and I write about this in the book, is that it's just also so important to notice when your internal system, when your nervous system needs a break too, because, it's a lot of management too. So I was giving this example to somebody else, where I was saying that hey, there are some days, I know there may be a certain food or like I've come to recognize that like alcohol just does not, was never one to drink a lot, but like the occasional glass of wine here and there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I have to be super attentive to that now because it's like one of the number one things that will instigate a flare. But then there
Hmm.
are times where I'm like, I'm on vacation or I'm celebrating
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
birthday or I'm doing
Hmm.
this. And I'm like, okay, dear body, we're going to pay the price. We know we're going to pay the price for this, but we're going to have this drink or two, this glass of
Hmm.
wine or
Hmm.
two. But I'm aware and at the same time softening into that, if someone here goes back to sort of even the diet culture and health and wellness industries messages, there are plenty of things, and I'm not saying that this isn't right for some people, because everyone has their own way of working with this. But for myself, coming from the background of having been, absolutely free and healed with my eating disorder since I was a teenager, early 20s, I personally will be very attentive to my body and food and what foods may instigate and what foods may not.
Hmm.
But personally, I will not chase down like an entire prescriptive diet on a
Hmm.
certain thing or eliminate
Yeah. Yeah.
fully unless I am allergic, I have celiac, unless I have that, But that's just my piece because on the compassion end for me, and on the embodied end for me, I need to have fluidity in my
Hmm.
life. I need to have joy and how important that is for nervous system regulation. And I need to have balance,
Hmm.
equanimity, and how important that is for all my balance too. So for me, that does mean being fluid with
Hmm.
this process of feeling into and making choices interoceptively. And
Hmm.
that's what works for me.
Wonderful.
Mm.
I'm so delighted for your new book, Your
Thank
Body
you.
Never Meant You Any Harm. When is that going to be coming out?
July 21st. I'm so excited.
Woo!
Yes.
July 21st. That is
Yes.
that is great. What's the best? I know you have some websites. What's the best way if anyone wants to find out more about your work, they want to get in your world, they want to take a program, they want to anything, is there a certain main website or just want to share them
Yes,
differently?
well, there's the main website is An Embodied Life, so it's AN Embodied Life, and there has all my offerings as far as both individual, and then I do have a separate program website, which is www.befriendingyourbodyprogram.com, and that leads to the 8-week program, and for professionals, the certification path to that somatic recovery program. And so they can go to either site to reach out to me. And my next program begins in September. So wait list opens very soon for registration and probably end of June, beginning of July.
That's so wonderful. I just really appreciate you being here with me today, Anne, because you're just a bastion of knowledge and wisdom and compassion and just absolutely an innovator in the field and just very, very inspirational and very notable what you do. And so I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your knowledge with me and with anyone who might be watching or listening today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Christina. I really appreciate it. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.